When I bought my newest bike in 2025, I went from a Japanese machine to another Japanese machine, a Kawasaki versus 300 to a Honda CRF 300L to be exact. I had the privilege of riding and reviewing many German, American, British, Indian, and Chinese makes in recent years, and yet I still felt personally for me a Japanese brand was still the obvious choice. Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki are the four heavenly kings of motorcycling. And even in 2026, despite the electric revolution and rising global competition, they continue to hold the crown from a business and brand recognition perspective. Let me preface this video by defining what brand and country will mean for this video, because I understand that in today's highly globalized manufacturing network, a distinctively German brand like BMW sources parts designed and made by other companies across the globe, and also even contracts manufacturing out to Chinese factories before being assembled in India, for example. As far as I am concerned, a brand's national identity is wherever their design and business decision makers come from. So, in the case of, for example, Honda, it is definitively a Japanese brand despite much of its manufacturing happening outside of it. A lot of this is going to be relative oversimplification, but I feel in general the brands coming from the same country have similarities due to the culture and professional environments their corporate leadership were raised in. And while there are many countries, including Malaysia and Thailand, that physically manufactures motorcycles, a lot of them do so under license or builds them in such small quantities to serve only a local market that they are almost never up for consideration for the general public. I will start with the lowest hanging fruit here, with the entire Western European bloc. I'm not trying to portray the entirety of Western Europe as a cultural monolith, they obviously aren't. But considering how in the past 50 years, a lot of corporate consolidation has seen most European brands falling under the umbrella of German ownership and the economic landscape being heavily influenced by a single authority, that being the EU, Western European brands somewhat converge on the same design and business models. Everyone knows that when you buy a BMW GS or a Ducati or even a Reize, you are expecting primarily either performance or some other luxury, be it fit and finish or style, which is generally the case. Even Ducati's entry-level Scrambler 400 or BMW's G310 series offers comparatively better styling and finish and a feel of luxury compared to the best that China or India can put out. But from a consumer's point of view, as we enter an era where we are suffering from decades of stagnating wages and increasing prices for very little discernible improvement in the European bikes we buy, this is a very, very sore point of contention. From my perspective as a Singaporean, if you could afford to pay European prices back in the early 2000s, there is a legitimate sense it was money well spent for something that performed better, sounded better, and felt more luxurious than even a Japanese motorcycle. Other Asian manufacturers at the time weren't even making anything more complicated than a lawnmower that carries people. But time marches on. China has caught up technologically, and whether it is a scummy move or not, their prices for something comparable to a European product often cost as little as half as much due to the amount of subsidies the Chinese government pumps into their exporting industries. And yet, on a technological level, European brands have not managed to continue developing anything that can further differentiate themselves from the Japanese or the Chinese. No legitimate attempt at mass market answers to EVs or alternative power plants. no attempt to spread out into different market segments and demographics that doesn't involve luxury. It's been made even worse by the fact that while prices of European products, including motorcycles, continue to skyrocket into the clouds, wages across the globe have not managed to keep up. There really isn't any reason beyond marketing that would entice the average biker to desire a Triumph or a BMW or a Ducati, even though I own one myself. Then there are the American brands. Harley and Indian, for the most part, really take the limelight when people think of American motorcycle brands. Yet for the most part, these two really suffer from the same issue as European motorcycles. A little technological development and an answer to global markets with a similarly exorbitant price tag. But I'll give you that if Harley was not the legacy juggernaut living rent-free in every biker's head, the fact that there are indeed legitimate attempts by some reasonably innovative micro manufacturers like Zero and Brembo to become mass manufacturers in their own right and thus up for consideration by bikers globally exists. Especially ever since Trump's administration has had an adverse effect in destroying the American economy that led to some offshoring. Still, the biggest problem with American brands is the incredibly insular business and design decisions that have been and continue to be made, even when compared to European manufacturers like BMW. At least BMW tries to and fails to tickle the budget segment with machines like the G310 series by making them in India. Harley and Indian, on the other hand, year after year, continue to make heavyweight cruisers that, while perfectly suited for the American highway and has a legitimate purpose for the utilitarian American, the same cannot be said for buyers elsewhere. Their attempts to address other market segments with the Livewire and Indian FTR, for example, have mostly tanked or gone unnoticed, in large part because of their own self-sabotaging American customer base that won't let them grow their business in other market segments. In this sense, American manufacturers have largely failed to capture even a nominal international market, with the only reason buyers of a Harley Davidson outside of America exists more or less primarily because of outlaw motorcycle gang chapters and other forms of Americana, rather than the actual merits of the machine themselves. Then we move on to Indian-made motorcycles, the country, not the brand. Hero, TVS, Bajaj and Royal Enfield have cumulatively placed India second only to Japan in terms of motorcycles sold worldwide. The problem is Indian brands in their current state live and die by the Indian demographic, in the same way the American motorcycle industry is constrained and dependent on the domestic market. Only roughly 17 to 20% of motorcycles sold by the Indian Big Four are outside India itself. Hence, a lot of the designs coming out from the Indian Big Four are limited heavily by what is considered an acceptable price point in India. Even models they would consider performance or luxury, which is basically very cheap. Royal Enfield by itself would be considered the single most luxurious motorcycle manufacturer native to India in the eyes of the locals. But as far as markets in developed economies go, they are really not much more of a step up from the millions of utility vehicles that TVS, Bajaj and Hero pump out. Things that are common on flagship machines from manufacturers in other countries like Triumph, BMW, CF Moto or Honda don't even exist on the best Royal Enfield can offer. Things like immobilizers and other security features, cruise control, throttle by wire, quick shifters or even advanced ignition systems. And even when a fancy feature exists like a TFT display with phone connectivity, they mostly end up being systems that are one step behind the rest of the world. India's biggest problem as of the foreseeable future is that their economy jumped from a heavily primary resource production country to a services-based one without ever properly developing a sophisticated manufacturing sector like every other country with a fully incorporated automotive industry did. They never were able to train the talent nor develop the market demand to produce high-end motorcycles for the international market. And as far as global market segmentation is concerned, have the exact opposite problem European makers face. And in my opinion, this is the biggest thing holding them back from actually taking the crown from Honda and Yamaha without relying on the heavily protectionist policies in India itself. For the Chinese, both mainland China and Taiwan, they face the most promise of dominating global motorcycle markets and the minds of global customers in the future. Mainland brands like CF Moto, Vogue, and Benda all have variety within their lineup to tackle as many markets as possible. You can get a CF Moto 450 MT if you want an adventure motorcycle. And if you are in the market for a niche segment like power cruisers, Benda even sells the LCF 700. While Taiwan dominates the world's scooter demand with brands like SYM and Kymco. Even with regards to electric options, both China and Taiwan are leading the way in this segment in a way no other country's industries are choosing to handle. And the thing is, almost every mainland Chinese brand seems to be capable of selling motorcycles laden with flagship tech for absolutely rock bottom prices. However, for one, this is partly due to the CCP's aggressive use of national funds to heavily subsidize industries they intend to conquer the global market with, including the automotive industry. There is no guarantee when either the funds dry up or market dominance is achieved, such value for money offerings are in any way sustainable by Chinese manufacturers themselves. Chinese manufacturers have also in recent years seen a massive improvement in their brand perception, partly because of people like myself in the media space who are regularly bringing it up as a talking point. Though in my defense, Chinese motorcycle manufacturers are truly putting out machines nearly on par with the Europeans, and no one can objectively argue heavily for or against Chinese bikes mechanically without their political views being clear for all to see. However, the biggest problem even the highest grossing Chinese motorcycle brand, CF Moto, is facing in their global markets is perception of reliability due to the logistics network for spare parts. While the Japanese have built up a logistics empire throughout the whole world for over half a century, and European, American, and Indian brands still manage with relatively favorable global trade agreements and outsourcing to ensure a consistent supply of spare parts to global customers. Chinese brands, on the other hand, face a bottleneck where everything would have been made in China, from the smallest bolt to a full TFT display. However, when faced with the choice of making the same TFT display for BMW or Triumph and selling them at a markedly higher premium, much of this production capacity gets diverted from domestic brands. It also does not help that in recent years, when CF Moto, for example, has the willingness and capability to expand worldwide with aggressive marketing, it is also a period where China itself faces the biggest trade barriers with their intended markets. They also have compounded the parts problem by taking a page out of the European playbook with constant model updates with totally new parts and features without the underlying logistics to support it either. That brings me back as to why the Japanese Big Four are still so dominant in the global motorcycle market today despite all these new challenges from India and China. The Japanese have their hand in literally every pie on the planet. Individually, each brand has a machine for any displacement, any purpose, and at any price point in the global market. Cheap light-duty dual sport, Honda CRF 300L or a Kawasaki KLX 300. Middleweight cruiser, maybe a Kawasaki Eliminator or Vulcan S. What about a luxurious adventurer tourer? Suzuki has a 1050 V-Strom. Sport bike? They've all got a Halo replica each to sports utility and everything in between. If you've got a very specific application that needs to be filled like I did when I decided to buy my CRF 300L, you can definitely find one from the Japanese Big Four catalogs if they don't appear anywhere else. And I still have yet to get into incredibly localized models Japanese makers like Honda makes to serve a highly specific market need, like the CD70 did for the Pakistani market. Honda alone has motorcycle manufacturing plants in 23 countries across every single continent on the planet, with Yamaha, Suzuki and Kawasaki trailing a distant second that still outclasses every non-Japanese manufacturer in terms of presence. If you took your motorcycle on a round-the-world trip, could you claim to find a part locally or regionally for a 1300 GS or a CF Moto CLX 700 in the same way you could find parts that fit a Super Cup or a Tenere? Beyond that, in the past decade or so, Japan has proven to really be the only place where companies are seriously committing resources to R&D in actual groundbreaking motorcycle technologies. Yeah, I mean, sure, China has kind of cornered the EV motor and battery tech development as it is, but for everything else, that's Japan's game. Honda recently started pushing out bikes with their e-clutch technology that actually serves a specific market need that so far isn't covered by either DCT or a centrifugal clutch. I'll cover on this in a later video. Yamaha has YAMT. While it's really more of a gimmick than true revolution, it is still a massive stepping stone to work on. Kawasaki bloody developed hybrids with the Ninja Hybrid 7 to resolve that gap between electric and combustion engines. It has problems that definitely needs to be ironed out, but it is a revolutionary direction to head in if Kawasaki continues on this course. Kawasaki is also part of the group developing hydrogen fuels. It's debatable as to whether such a technology is worth the trouble economically and environmentally, but it still proves truly revolutionary automotive R&D is occurring heavily in Japan. That will only create more and more options motorcyclists can choose from. Right now, all these advantages the Japanese Big Four have over their rivals in other countries just don't seem easy to overcome. And as a biker myself who wants a motorcycle to be more than just get from point A to point B, Japanese companies like Honda or Kawasaki will continue to be the first catalog I will look at for choosing my next purchase. What do you guys think? Do you think the Japanese brands will continue remaining at the top of your list, or have they never been there to begin with? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you like this video, do give me a like, subscribe, and all that YouTube jazz, and I will see you next time. Peace out. Ciao.